how to study for midterm 2. So your goal is to figure out what types of problems that would appear in the exam. The emphasis is the types of problems because there are many homework problems, right? But they are classified into different types. So let's start with, let's say, chapter 12. So you look at your homework. So basically is you use your homework as your guide. Now what do I mean by that? So you look at chapter 12. So let's say you go through the first question. So you read, and then you figure out what's the question asking you. What kind of thing is the question asking you? Well, is it conceptual or computational? This question 1 doesn't seem to have any calculations involved. So, okay, you think, okay, it's conceptual. So you say, okay, and you go back, then you take your notes. Okay, so you say, question 1 is conceptual. Then you briefly write down what it's about, what's the topic, what's the idea. Well, the topic actually is the idea of probability. And I've just noticed that I have a typo. I'm sorry, here's a typo. Okay, so you quickly say conceptual, chapter 12.1, idea of probability. Okay, so you quickly classify it because you will have to go back to review your notes. Then you quickly look at question 2. So question 2 and blah, blah, blah. Well, is it computational or conceptual? It seems like it's computational, asking you about probability. Then you say, this is to calculate, find probability. Okay. Now, if you can figure out that some keywords, then you can say, okay, now what types of probability? But if you cannot at this stage, that's okay. Just move on quickly. Then you do question number 3. Question number 3, you look at the question carefully. Well, it's also computational because asking about probability. So you write it down again. But this time you notice that there's a keyword not here. Okay, then you quickly say not to remind yourself, because there are different types of probability questions. There are different tricks in a sense. So it's good to remind yourself what are these key terms or tricky phrases that Olivia will ask me. Then you continue, let's say with question number 4. You quickly read it. Again, this is probability. Now, number 5, you know this is calculation, computational. And yes, they asked about probability. But the format is a bit different, the question format, because you're given a bunch of information in a column format. So these are the details that you should record in your notes. This is calculate. It's also to find probability. But you are given a model, and you have actually 2 columns. And what are the 2 columns? Roughly speaking, is the cause, kind of like a bunch of values. So these are the values. You kind of labels. Basically, this cause is a categorical variable. And then you're given the probability, the corresponding probability for each value. Okay? So this is how you classify each question. Let's use another example. Let's say, okay, 13. 13 is also calculations, but this time you're giving a table, but it looks a bit different. So you record that in your notes. Find probability, but this time you're given 2 rows. And you're giving the x, all these x values and the corresponding probabilities. Okay. So let's take another example, and I think you got the idea. Okay, that's the last one. 33. This is a conceptual. was about a random variable. Then so this time is conceptual, was about random variable. So after you go through each question quickly, you classify them, you jot down little notes about each of them, then you go back, you look at all these. So you see that they're conceptuals, and what are the kinds of conceptual questions? I can ask you about the idea probability, or I can ask you about random variables. And you look at the calculation, computational questions. What can I ask you? I can ask you probability. Basically, I ask you probability, but I can give you different type of phrases, or I can give you different formats, columns or rows, okay? And then after you do all your classification, then you can go to your nooks or your textbook for details and practice. And this is one of the ways to prepare, a very good way to prepare for your midterm too. Remember, your goal is to figure out what kind of problems that Olivia will ask you. And this is one of the best ways to do that.